Good afternoon. I'm Father Eric Zimmer, Director of Leadership Development for the School of Medicine, and I would like to welcome you all to our first program for this year's First Week Seminar. The first week is a reference to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, in which a retreatant reflects on, prays over one's proper orientation in life, proper orientation to God and to society. And so it's an apt descriptor for our program today and all our programs in the first week. Today, we have a group of panelists who are going to be talking to us about leadership as Magis. And in this, what I've asked them to do is to talk a little bit about how they came to be in leadership positions here at the School of Medicine. And in their roles as leaders, how they see themselves as contributing to the Magis, to the greater glory of God. Particularly, or thinking along the lines of leadership as vocation. For those who are being trained to be physicians here at Creighton University School of Medicine, the expectation is that when you become doctors, you are out in the community as leaders, as people who are contributing to the development of society, the development of the community, and in addition to the basic practice of medicine, you're doing so much more. And so I'd like to introduce to you our panelists, and because Dr. Zielinski asked that we might go in alphabetical order.
I'm so used to being last, you know, so.
Of course, with a name like Zimmer, I sometimes find it helpful to go reverse alphabetical, but she didn't ask for that, so I won't provide that. We'll start with Dr. Robert Dunley. Dr. Bo Dunley is the Chief Medical Officer for Creighton University Medical Center. And next we'll listening to Dr. Tom Hansen, who is the Associate Dean for Medical Education. After that, Dr. Jim Mannion, who is the Department Chair for Anesthesiology. And then finally, last but not least, Dr. Zielinski, who will be speaking, or Dr. Zielinski is the Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Education. And so we'll be speaking in this order, and I'd like to start with Dr. Dunley. Thank
you. I'm always amused when I'm asked to do this because I'm going to tell you right off the bat I'm not a particularly holy person. One of my great goals in the mid-50s is to learn how to get through a day without cursing vehemently. And I'm not really succeeding on a daily basis at that. I'm going to give you some background so you understand where I came from, because I think that's critical to what I do now. My father was a family doc in a small town in Iowa. We would literally have people bring their sick relatives up to the front porch of the house in the evenings. He took call every second or third night, delivered babies, did surgery, kind of did it all in a small town. And I would say maybe got a day off once a month. And I never saw him question that. I saw him exhausted. I saw him probably practicing medicine many times when we would stop other people from practicing medicine, but you know, these guys were all there were in this small town, and they did a great job and they were revered. So that tempers my approach towards some aspects of work. I never really heard him complain. I think he always felt like he was lucky to be able to be helping people and enjoying the life he had. He grew up in a small farm in western Nebraska during the Depression and had stories about eating cornbread and syrup for breakfast and lunch and supper. My formative years after Creighton were spent in the Navy, and the military is a unique institution. You learn quickly that the world does not revolve around you. I know Dr. Mannion will share some Navy stories with you. But I would say that for those of you who are entertaining military time, a bad day in the Navy is still an excellent observational experience on leadership. Good leadership, bad leadership, but every day in the Navy you experience leadership of some sort. And it's very clear cut. People don't ask me what I want to do. They tell you, Bo, you're going to go do sick call, and when you're done with that, you're going to go do this. And what do you feel like doing today was not part of the equation, so it was a very interesting experience. When I got to Creighton, I was already in my, think about this, late 30s. And we had at the time, the first year I was here, at the end of my first year here, they made me chief of nephrology. They really didn't say apply for the job. They made me chief of nephrology, which led to the guy that'd been here 20 years quitting, which I hadn't really thought it through at the time, but I think everybody else in the organization realized he was going to quit if they made me chief. So that meant that everything else I did for the next 5 years, we were taking every other night call. Little difficulty that I had anticipated. After my third year here, they called me in and asked me to be the program director in internal medicine. Again, usually when you become program director, it's not like you apply, you get asked, usually in a time of crisis. And so at the time, I was a young man, I'd won a couple teaching awards. The first time they asked me, I said, no, I don't think I have time. I'm taking everything at call. So they waited a while, and then they came back and asked me again and explained why I should do it. And I did it, and if I had known, if I had been smart, and I had known, thought things through, I probably wouldn't have done it. Because once I got into the job, as it turns out, the medicine board passage rate at the time was only 70%. And at the time, if you went below 65% on your board passage rate, and it's a cumulative 3-year average, your program gets decertified. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and that's probably actually when I started praying again, because I actually interviewed all the residents in the program, and honest to God, some of them said to me, well, I really don't know why I'm a medicine resident. I just applied and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I told them maybe I ought to go home and think about doing something else. And their jaws dropped. But I think it's the first time somebody honestly said, you know, you don't have to be here. So we instituted a rule that you had to be at the 50th percentile in your training examination to moonlight. And it was a very, very difficult situation. I've got a lady whose husband finished cardiology, who's in a small town in smaller town in western Nebraska. And every time she sees me to this day, she reminds me of the economic hardship her family endured because I wouldn't let her husband moonlight. And I had another resident who came in and said, well, you can't change the rules halfway through the program. Well, I think if you know it's the right thing to do, you have to go ahead and do it. It's just the right thing to do. And you know, one thing about Jesuits that we don't appreciate the way we should is, and I've read this in one of their textbooks, really one of the Jesuit ideals is pursuing excellence. So if you're not interested in pursuing excellence, then you're really in the wrong place. If you're interested in pursuing average, then you really need to be somewhere else. So, you know, we're not, and the residents have heard this ad nauseum from me, you know, we're not here to produce doctors, we're here to produce outstanding physicians. Okay, and that's a different sort of person. So, so I did those jobs for a while, and then at a certain point, you realize somebody else needs to take over and do these jobs. And we had a chair change, and I told the new chair, you know, I really think that I'll do this for one more year while you have time to think about replacing me in these positions, and then I'm going to go do something else. And I didn't know what I was going to go do, but I was finishing my MBA, and I thought I'll probably move somewhere else and do something else. And I don't think he thought I was serious because he did absolutely nothing. And I would bring it up once in a while, and he would just say, yeah, I'm thinking about it. And then I think that finally somebody approached me about becoming the chief medical officer at the hospital. The guy that was actually doing it at the time, Wes Grigsby, was sick of it. And I think somebody had told him, why don't you find your own replacement, and then you can get out of doing it. So then I went back to the chair and said, you know, I'm really going to quit. And he said, well, I thought you were just kidding. I never actually thought you were serious. So then he recruited John Hurley to be program director, which worked out quite well. John's actually done a great job. So these aren't jobs that I applied for. These are jobs that I was asked to do. The toughest, and each job, it seems as though, the chief of nephrology was pretty easy, but each job, it seems, the talk going in has been, things have to get a lot tougher. You have to crack the whip on some people. Dr. Zimmer and I had to talk about this before I took the current position, was that peer review needed to be enhanced. The physicians need to be held more accountable. So you have days where, like this afternoon, I know I'm going to have a difficult meeting with a physician, so you have days and you ask yourself, you know, how am I going to behave? And the first thing is, you know, you just have to pray for patience. So every morning on the way to work for years, I prayed for patience, because that actually seems to be the toughest part for me. And the second thing I prayed for is not to become angry today, which usually latches on to becoming impatient. First you're impatient, And then you become angry because you become impatient. And then, once you're angry, all bets are off. I mean, anger is irrational. It doesn't matter how calm and cool and collected you normally are. Once you're angry, that's it. Even now, I got a complaint today, for example, about somebody's behavior, and it was so ugly that I was immediately angry. And what I've learned now is how to manage myself, is that I just set it down, and I'll wait and I'll take a look at it again tomorrow. It's not a life-threatening problem. I'll just take a look at it again tomorrow, because I can't manage people's behavior if my emotions are getting in the way of interpreting their behavior. And that's a matter of, again, praying that I not be angry when I meet with the person. This afternoon I meet with somebody who I've met with on numerous occasions. He's like a frequent flyer on the naughty physician list. And every time I meet with him, it was everybody else's fault. I know, it's kind of like when you're in the ER, somebody's been beat up, and it's always these three dudes. The same three dudes are all over the United States beating people up. Well, here it's always everybody else's behavior. So I'm looking forward to yet another festive story about how the system and the nurses have conspired to make this physician look bad in front of his peers. It's always entertaining. And then I put a letter in his file. It's like, it has to stop at some point. We have to be more accountable. I guess the only thing on some days that would keep me from going insane, somebody somehow sent me, I have in my possession, and I don't really know how. It was on my bookshelf, and I found it a couple of years ago. A prayer book. I think there's a prayer book that priests read. I'm supposed to sign to read a couple times a day, book of Christian prayer. Anyway, I started reading this thing without having actually any knowledge about it. And finally, at one point, I sat down with Father Clifton and said, why don't you explain this to me so I know what I'm doing? And so I try and read that once, if not twice a day, to keep myself grounded. And kind of I'm thinking about the right things at the start of the day and the end of the day. And then actually everything else seems to fall in perspective after that. I would say that I think that as your responsibility increases in life, probably your need to take a step back and pray on a regular basis increases, because there's a little bit more at stake if you fly off the handle or make a bad decision. And I also think it's fair to say sometimes when people want you to say something, I need to take some time and think about this. And then, usually pray about it a little bit more and think about it a little bit more. Bounce it off my wife a couple times and see what she says. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Dunley. Dr. Hansen.
I'm Tom Hansen. I'm actually the physician that's on the frequent naughty list, and I have a meeting this afternoon. So this has been very helpful.
It's like a 12-step program for Tom. Hi, my name's Tom Hansen.
Right.
I'm a naughty physician. Hello, Tom.
I'm the Associate Dean for Medical Education, and when I entered medical school, I actually had no intention of being in education or being in leadership. My thought at that time was to get skills to be able to do missionary work and to go and find a clinic in a developing country and spend time working there. And what happened was, as I went through residency, I had the opportunity to be the chief resident during our third year. At the time, our residency program wasn't doing so well, so as chief resident, I basically got to do pretty much anything I wanted, to improve the program, because we had as residents, we had such great pride in our residency program. We really wanted it to excel, and so, I was doing everything I could to make it a good program, and I just remember often thinking, boy, if I were program director, I would do it this way. And so, after I graduated, we actually were put on probation by the RRC, and so I was asked if I would be willing to assume the role of the program director. And I give credit to Betsy Kimball, because she at that time was our administrator. Now she's with CMA, and she saw a skill set in me that I hadn't necessarily seen in myself, a skill set that she thought would really help the residency program grow. And so she and Dr. Fry, at the time my chair, had asked if I'd be willing to be the program director, and so I took the job. And I quickly realized that I have the skill set to take requirements for a residency program and to take a look at where are we right now, quickly develop an action plan. How do we get from where we are to where we need to be for accreditation and move in that direction? So that was the skill set that I had. The skill set that I wasn't sure how to do, and I still sometimes don't feel I do very well, is the people management of it. You know, when we're in medical school, we're really taught the medical knowledge aspect, and more we're bringing all the competencies into medical education. But how to manage people, which is not taught that as someone who's a leader. And so I started taking a look at how do I develop that skill set. And so taking some leadership courses, at one point finally making the decision, I think it's time to go for an MBA so I get some training, education in leadership skills, and currently continuing in that program here. So over the course of the past few years, and then as I moved into my role now as Associate Dean for Medical Education, I've kind of developed 6 main things, and I promise this will be brief, but 6 main things that for me are the Magis. This is how for me, I want to try to go to that next level so that it really is striving for excellence. The first is being very familiar and focusing on the mission statement. Everything that I do, every decision should be consistent with the mission statement, because that helps keep the decisions that I'm making not about me, but about what's best for this institution. And so regularly I look at our mission statement. Our students, you know, and they know the mission statement of our university, of our medical school, of our hospital. They're familiar with how that works. So the mission statement is key for me. Second is self-knowledge. I think it's important for me to know what are my strengths, what are my areas of weakness, how do I develop those areas of weakness so that I don't let those get in the way or block my being an effective leader, and how do I develop my strengths so I really am able to be an even better leader based on the strengths that I have. And with that, the Jesuits have this form of prayer called the examen that they do after, usually around noon, and then at the end of the day, where they just look over their day and what are the areas that, you know, brought me consolation, what are the areas that brought me desolation, and so for me, what are the areas that I think I did a pretty good job in, and what are those areas that I'm really embarrassed about whatever I said or an email I sent out or whatever it may be, that I want to do better next time, and how do I want to go about so that next time I'm more proactive than reactive in certain situations. So number 2, self-knowledge. Number 3 would be the study of leadership. I think that those institutions who perhaps struggle are the ones who may have people in leadership positions who never really had any training on how to be a leader, and for whatever reason, people were put into leadership positions. Just as we don't practice medicine without having training in medicine, I think that is so important for leaders to have some knowledge of leadership. What makes a good leader? How do you go about doing this? How do you differentiate those situations where sometimes you have to be an autocratic leader and just say, the decision is mine, I gotta make this decision, here's what it's gonna be, versus a democratic leader where you say, as a group, as a team, what's the best decision here for us to make? So to be able to spend that time to really study leadership styles and then to be able to implement it in my own work. So number 3 would be study of leadership. Number 4, I think it's so important to remain at the front line. So, you know, for me to have my clinic time so that I'm able to be with my patients, my time where I'm rounding with my residents, the time where I'm in small groups or giving lectures so I can be with my students. Those are the times that I really cherish, you know, small groups. So my small group was here today. Stressful day, and that was probably the highlight of my day, is just being able to spend time with my students. So being part of the front line, and then knowing when my colleagues are coming in talking about their experience, I share that common experience with them. Number 5, customer service, and this is something that Monica and Pat Blue in my office really have a mantra that has influenced me. The focus has got to be on my students in my current job. That's why I'm there. And if I'm not able to be responsive and available to my students, then what's the point? you know? And so keeping customer service and realizing, all right, how do we do this? How do we do it well? And I can't do that. I need my team. And so to then continue to recognize the value of everyone that's part of my office and how they provide customer service that I can't do individually, it just helps me keep in mind we really are part of a larger team. And then the last thing is probably the most important for me, the golden rule. Treat other people as I want them to treat me. So, you know, and again, I don't always do this well, and there are times where I'm embarrassed when I think, oh, why did I say that? Or Dr. Zimmerman has been a great mentor as far as, you know, it might be worth just waiting a day before you send an email, especially if, you know, there's some emotion attached to it. And you're right, Rowan, I got to do that. But, you know, to treat other people as I want to be treated, and I think especially with my employees, when we're leaders, we've got people who are direct reports to us, and they're vulnerable. They work hard. They're trying to do the best that they can with the resources I'm able to provide. And if I'm frustrated about something, it's wrong for me to take it out on the people who work for me. You know, I need to deal with that with the appropriate people. So to treat my staff, to treat my students, my residents, my patients with the same respect that I would want them to show to me. So those are the 6 areas that for me are the Magis for leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson. Dr. Mannion.
Thank you, Father. I'm the chairman of anesthesia, as Father introduced me, and I'm in the category of chairman by default, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I have some preliminary, information to give you before I start. I went to Creighton undergrad and Creighton Medical School. I graduated in 1966. I went to the Navy and spent 7 years there. I got to Vietnam. I got to do some submarining, a rich, full experience in the Navy. I stayed in private practice there for another 6 years. By that time, my wife and I had 2 children, and we would come back to Nebraska, my home, and the homecomings would be joyous, where my children would meet grandparents and uncles and aunts. And I said to my wife, I want to come home. And she said, Los Angeles wouldn't be as much fun without me, so she said she agreed to come. And besides that, I've always considered this somewhat providential, that at the same time I wanted to come home, an opportunity arose at Creighton to help start the anesthesia department. And so I, along with some other anesthesiologists, worked to get the anesthesia department going, and now almost 33 years have elapsed. I've been on the faculty here for 33 years. Mainly as a clinician. I don't have a business background. I wish I had one, and I would urge you folks out there to get masters in business administration, because I think that would really help you in future leadership roles. This chairman by default comes from a history where we had a chairman for 10 years, and he became weary of that, and it took a year to find another candidate, and he was on board for 3 or 4 months, and that didn't work out at all. And so Dr. Zelensky, who was the acting dean at that time, called me up and wondered if I would be the chairman. And before I even hung up the phone or consulted with my wife, I said, sure, I'll do it. I love the institution. It's she started, and then I do have some more comments, but I've got to gather myself.
No, it was a very difficult situation at the time when I asked Dr. Mannion to become, the chair of anesthesia. There was a lot that preceded that, and a lot of emotional ties for him and the whole department. And it was particularly emotional because I was the dean that made the decision to let the new chair of anesthesia go. Having been a surgeon, I knew very greatly what that meant to the department and how there were struggles before. But the decision that I made was, I felt at that time for the best for the university and for the department. And Dr. Mannion, in a very difficult situation, you know, when I asked him, agreed to take the job, and in a very difficult situation, and he did, you know, he did a great job at holding the department together, gathering them, supporting them, and bringing them through this crisis. You okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
For 33 years, I've told just about every medical student who has rotated on anesthesia that this is a good place to work. Why don't you?
Do you want me to go?
Give your piece.
Well, mine's going to be different than everybody else. I came to Creighton with very different credentials and a different background. But I'm going to tell you a story. It was about me when I was in high school. I was running for president of the student body and worked very hard and everything to do this. And then I didn't make it because one of the teachers felt this, it was an all-girls high school, that this other girl should be it, and so she told the class not to vote for it, and not to vote for me. And so I came home, I was very discouraged. My parents, my mom said, why don't we just go to visit your grandmother in Pennsylvania? It's a 4-hour trip. And on the trip, she told me something. She put her hand on my knee when we were traveling, and she said, you know, I know you're very disappointed in what has happened. She said, but you know, a lot of times in life, things don't go the way we want, but there's always a reason for it. And later on in your life, you are going to benefit from this. This is going to help you deal with things. And that was one of the things that I've carried through. The other thing she had taught me over the years, that never confront anybody when you're angry. Walk away from it. Think about it, sleep over it, try to put yourself in that other person's shoes and try to look at this situation from their point of view. And my mom was a very wise woman, and I think I've tried to follow those things through my life. I came to Creighton. I was not a Creighton undergraduate. I'm from New York City, born in Brooklyn, raised in Mill Village, Queens. I was in the convent for 17 years. I entered a semi-cloistered order, and if you think the Navy is rough, bro, I can tell you some stories. But it was a wonderful formation that I had. And unbeknownst to anybody, I just decided that I had a sister that had polio. I wanted to go to medical school. We had the Superior General, an international community, would come around, and she would talk to each one of the sisters, and then she said to me, you know, I told her what I was doing. She said, and what can the community do for you? And I said, I want to be a doctor. And she looked at me. Nobody had ever done this before. And so I said, I have all the studies except I need 2 courses. And she said, speak to your provincial. And I spoke to my provincial. I took the 2 courses, and then I applied to medical school. Of course, I was limited because the community wanted me to go to basically a Catholic medical school, so I applied to Creighton, to Loyola, to Marquette, and to Women's Medical College because it was fairly close to where the order was. So I came to Creighton, and when I came for my interview, Dr. Holthouse was then the dean, and he really didn't know what to do with me because here I am in my religious habit coming to interview and everything. But I was accepted at Creighton. In those days, so it was in the 60s, you had to accept, you had a certain amount of time, you had to accept the seat or not. And so I heard from Creighton first, and that's the one we accepted, and then I had heard from Marquette and Loyola. But I came to Creighton after teaching high school for 4 years. So I was a high school teacher. And it was an adjustment. I failed my first 3 anatomy tests. it is, when you teach, you learn, you look at things very differently. You want the broad aspect. You want to be able to do things and look at things and embellish your lessons. I had to learn. And my classmates said, "Sister, you got to get with it. We're going to get you here. We'll pimp you with the questions that they're going to ask." I didn't do that for 4 years, 5 years. I was learning things the other way, the broad to teach. So I did that, and I did pass my anatomy, and I became a surgeon, believe it or not. And I had some roadblocks. We were the largest class of women in Creighton's history. We were 5 out of 82. And when I came here, I wanted to be a surgeon. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And then Dr. Lemke, the most noted surgeon around here, one day he said to me, "Sister, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'd like to be a surgeon." And he said, "Sister, women don't have the emotional stability or the stamina to be a surgeon." And I looked at him and I said, "Dr. Lemke, thank you very much. That's your opinion, but I want to be a surgeon and I will be a surgeon." And Dr. Hans was talking about going to the missions. I originally came to Creighton to go to the missions. In my senior year, I had a Smith, Klein and French Foreign Fellowship, and I spent 4 years in Malawi, where a hospital was, and I worked in the desolate part and also in the QE, the Queen Elizabeth in Blantyre, which was the capital. And it was an experience. When I got there, 2 weeks after I got there, the doctor was in charge, left the mission hospital, and I was it to make all the decisions. And it was a very difficult situation, but I just, prayed each day and did the best that I could. And then I came back to Creighton. I did my residency here, thinking I'm going to the missions, and I never was sent to the missions. I later found out that my chairman, Dr. Claude Organ, had told my superiors not to send me to the missions, that I should stay here. I then did a fellowship and started the transplant program here, the renal transplant program, and did that for 15 years, worked with Dr. Dunley and the renal physicians, and didn't want anything to do with the political situation. I just wanted to take care of my patients and do, and teach, because I love to teach. I was a teacher by nature, and so things came about. I was asked to be on the board, the governing board, and I think most people that know me know I'm not shy, and I say what I think. But I try to do it tactfully and honestly and pray over it. And the one thing that I have done over the years is try to make the decision that, like Dr. Hansen and Bo said, is for the good of the Institute, the good of the whole, not to look at it from my aspect. But then I became president of the medical staff, and also was then asked to be interim chair of the Department of Surgery. And I made some decisions there that were very difficult. And I think one of the things that are important is to be able to look into yourself. And I made a decision, and it was questioned by a very prominent faculty member. And I looked at him and I said, knowing what I know today, this is the decision that I've made. Maybe 20 years from now, knowing something different, I might have thought that that was not the best thing to do. But I can only look at what I see today, and this is why I made the decision that I did. So, it's a, what do I say? It's not easy to be in a leadership position, but I think you always must remember to be true to yourself and honest in your dealings, and be able to say, yeah, maybe I might have made a wrong decision, but I looked at it this way, and this is why I did the decision that I did. The other thing I want to share with you is, I think it's so important in medicine or in leadership, don't forget who you are and what you love to do. Don't give up the things that you love to do. everybody knows I have horses and I have dogs. I was the only transplant surgeon here for 15 years. I took call every day. I managed to show my horses and show my dogs. I managed to do the things that I wanted to do. I think that's so important. That's when you get frustrated, and even in a leadership position, you've got to take the time for yourself. And one of the things religious life taught me is I know my limitations. I know when I have to get away. I know when I can say enough is enough, and I won't do my patients any good, I won't do the Institute any good, I won't do my students any good. That's a thing that you must learn. Know your limitations and when you need to get away. I think these are very important things that we need to share with each other in a leadership position. And that's about it. Back to you.
Dr. Zielinski. Dr. Mannion, do you want to?
Yeah.
Give it.
I've told all the medical students that have rotated on anesthesia over the years that it's a very, very good place to work over there at the hospital. I see so many patients who are terribly sick or terribly injured, and here I am as healthy as I can be, and my family are all healthy. And so I know this helps me keep things in perspective in my life. And so I'm very thankful that I work there, and little things in life don't bother me nearly like they might other people. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Mannion. At this point, we have a little bit of time. I realize many of you have to go to class, but we have time for a few questions. If anyone would like to ask our panelists any questions.
Oh, go ahead, put us on the spot. Don't be shy. Come on, you know you have questions.
I have a question. This is for Dr. Mandy and Dr. Zielinski. As a physician and as a medical student as well, there's a lot of focus on the details. You have to learn all the pathways, all the diseases and everything. And in daily practice, you see a patient, you have to treat their diabetes, you have to treat their illness. Where does the big picture come into play? And how do you evolve from someone who, in the beginning, is just focused on the details and trying to get through school and trying to treat the patient, to seeing and asking questions, why is this happening in the first place? Why are these patients getting diabetes and why are they depressed? And seeing that big picture, because to me at least, what distinguishes a leader from someone who's just treating the daily things is the ability to ask questions. So how did you get to that point? And how, I guess for my sake, I'm a big picture person. How do I survive this detail stuff along the way?
I remember a comment she made to me on the telephone that night. She asked me to be the chairman. She said to be fair to everybody. Try very, very hard to be fair to everybody. And use your resources and appreciate that the other providers in the department are very skillful at what they do, and don't expect to do everything yourself. And then I can focus on a bigger picture about the personnel issues, and that's not the easiest thing to do, but it's all in your training year after year. You have plenty of mentors as you go along to guide you along.
And I'll add to that. You know, you talk about the details. Yes, you have to learn details, but also when you see a patient, you have to pay attention to the details. You have to pay attention to the way they sit, the way they stand, their reaction to you. You know, you've got to learn to also read their nonverbal communication, their body language, the way they're sitting there and everything, and be open to them. The other thing is just always remember that the patients come to us and they trust us, and we have to be honest. If you don't know, say you don't know. Because I can tell you, over the years when patients have come to me and they look like they're hesitant about what I'm telling them, I'd say, you know what, if you're not comfortable with this, you go get another opinion. I don't know everything, but at this point, this is the way I see it, and this is the treatment that you would have. So, you know, you go and be comfortable with what, you know, if you want another opinion, you go and get that, because that is your right. Also remember one thing with the patients in medicine, with the details and everything, we're here not to tell them what to do. We're here to give them the information that they need to make the decisions on their own health care. It used to be the doctor said, you do, you're not a good patient if you don't do it. We don't understand their whole makeup. We have to be open to them. There's things in their lives that we'll never know, and maybe they behave the way I do. And I think, and Bo will attest to this, it was the dialysis patients, the renal patients that taught me that. You know, I used to put them on the schedule, would get a call, and they have to declot the fistula, and it was late at night. And, you know, sometimes I would wait all day to get it on the schedule, and sometimes the patients wouldn't show up. And my residents just say to me, Dr. Z, how can you tolerate that? Look at, they just, you know, there's the whole schedule gone. And, you know, I thought back and I said, you know what would you be like? And I know what, I'd be a bear if I had somebody telling me what I could eat, how much I could drink, go to dialysis, feel miserable for a day, and then, you know, go back to my routine. I said, I'd be the same way. All they want is some control in their lives. And, you know, we have to allow them that control sometimes. We can't micromanage, but we have to be there at least to encourage them and to guide them. And just because they don't do something we tell them to do, they're not a bad patient. There may be reasons in their lives and so forth why they don't do that, and we have to be open to understanding why. Okay?
All of my patients are non-compliant. So when I have a patient that actually does what they're supposed to do, I just think it's remarkable.
Yes.
Other questions? Roberto.
I'm Roberto Cervantes. I'm a third-year student. I really appreciate sharing and the stories that you've shared with us. You all alluded to points where you've had part of leadership is making tough decisions. And we've talked a little bit about, you know, standing back, not making decisions in anger, being prayerful and praying over it. Can you share with us a little bit more about how you go about maybe making those tough decisions, and what makes it a little easier to make those decisions? Does it get any better, and does it get any easier, you know, as you gain more experience in making these decisions? I know Ben Carson wrote a book one time about how he goes about making decisions, and you know, he talks about how you say, what's the best thing that can happen if I do this? And what's the worst thing that can happen if I do this? And then you kind of reverse that and say, what's the best thing that can happen if I don't do this?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the worst thing that can happen if I don't do this? Kind of waters it down into a smaller little formula. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you go about making decisions, because that's the big role in leadership is having to make these tough decisions.
There's a lot of different types of decisions that need to be made. So, for instance, a decision may be made in a particular situation, for instance, with the curriculum. You know, what do we do in a particular case? And that's where it's helpful having a team, you know, who comes, I mean, the MEMT, including Dr. Huggett here, you know, they're bringing all their expertise. And then usually the decision is pretty clear. I find that what's the most difficult is when there's personnel involved that, for instance, you know, is this the right person for the job? And what I try to do in those situations where I can is I will often meet with the individual and say, really, we've come down to two choices. Either you need to make this change so that you're consistent with, you know, what we need from you, or you're not going to make that change, and then I'm not able to keep you, you know, on. And I had to do this quite a bit with my residents when I first took over the residency program, and with a staff member. In many ways, I find that helps me, because then I'm able to basically remove the responsibility from me, and really it's up to the resident, to the staff, whoever it is, to say, I gave you the information, you know what you need to do in order to remain here. So you kind of decide, and then, you know, at the end of the week, we're going to talk, or whatever the time frame. So that way they're making that decision for me, if you will. And then, you know, at the end of the week, you know, are you going to be able to do it? If yes, I need to see it consistently. We're going to meet regularly. So I try to find those ways of when we have the time to have a group process, a democratic process to say what is the right decision usually becomes clear. If it's with an employee, if I can, I will let them make that decision. There are times, however, you just have to take more the autocratic, and a decision has to be made right now. This is what's most consistent with the mission statement and what the job is.
I'm guessing that people need to leave, is that right? So we might just leave it at that, but I want to thank our panelists very much for their time, for their insights, and all the thoughts that they've given us to prepare us for leadership positions of one sort or another. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
There's a lot of emotion behind that.